Hello everybody. Well, I said today's story would be about an elephant, and it is. Here's a nice elephant with a great long trunk. And today's story is about how the elephant got his trunk. The story's called The Elephant's Child. And it all began a long time ago in far off times in a far off place. And the elephant didn't have a trunk. He only had a blackish, sort of bulgy nose, which was as big as a boot. And he could wriggle about from side to side with it, but he couldn't pick things up with it. But there was one elephant, a new elephant, an elephant's child, who had a satiable curiosity. And that means that he was forever asking questions. And he lived in Africa, and he filled all of Africa with insatiable questions. He asked his tall aunt, the ostrich, why her tail feathers grew so fast. And his tall aunt, the ostrich, spanked him with her hard claw. He asked his tall uncle, the giraffe, what made his skin all spotty, and his tall uncle, the giraffe, spanked him with his hard hoof. And still he was full of satiable curiosity. He asked his broad aunt, the hippopotamus, why her eyes were red. And his broad aunt, the hippopotamus, spanked him with her broad hoof. And he asked his hairy uncle, the baboon, why melons tasted just so. And his hairy uncle, the baboon, spanked him with his hairy paw. And still, he was full of satiable curiosity. The elephant's child asked questions about everything he saw, he heard, or felt, or smelt, or touched, and all his uncles and aunts spanked him. And still, he was full of satiable curiosity. Well, one fine morning, this elephant's child asked a new fine question that he'd never asked before. He asked, what does a crocodile have for breakfast? What does a crocodile have for lunch? What does a crocodile have for dinner? Then everybody said, hush, in a loud tone. And they spanked him immediately and directly without stopping, and for a very long time. Well, by and by, when all the spanking had finished, the elephant's child came upon a bird, a colo bird, sitting in the middle of a wait-a-bit thorn bush. And he said, my father has spanked me. My mother has spanked me. My aunts have spanked me. My uncles have spanked me for my satiable curiosity. And still, I want to know what the crocodile has for his dinner. The colo bird said with a mournful sort of cry, go to the banks of the great grey, green, greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees, and find out. So, that very next morning, this satiable elephant's child took 100 pounds of bananas, the little red kind of bananas, and 100 pounds of sugar cane, the long purpley kind, and 17 melons, the green sort of crackly kind. And he said to all his dear families, "Goodbye. I'm going to the great grey, green, greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees, to find out what the crocodile has for dinner." And you know what his uncles and aunts and mums and dads did? They all spanked him once more for luck, though the elephant's child did ask them very politely not to do so. Well, then he went away, and it was a little warm, but not at all astonished, eating melons and throwing the rind about because he could not pick it up. He went on his way. He went from Grahamstown to Kimberley, and from Kimberley to Camas Country, and from Camas Country he went east by north, eating melons all the time, till at last he came to the banks of the great grey, green, greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees, precisely as the Colo Colo bird had said. Now, you must understand that till that very week and day and hour and minute, the elephant's child had never seen a crocodile and did not know what one was like. It was all his satiable curiosity. The first thing he found was a bi-coloured python rock snake curled round a rock. "Excuse me," said the elephant's child most politely, "but have you seen such a thing as a crocodile in these parts?" "Have I seen a crocodile?" said the bi-coloured python rock snail in a voice of dreadful scorn. "What will you ask next?" "Excuse me," said the elephant's child, "but could you kindly tell me what he has for his dinner?" Then the bi-coloured python rock snake uncoiled himself very quickly from the rock, and he spanked the elephant's child with his scalesome, flailsome tail. "That is odd," said the elephant's child, "because my father and my mother and my aunts and my uncles, not to mention my aunt the hippopotamus and my uncle the baboon, have all spanked me for my satiable curiosity. And I suppose this is just the same thing." So he said goodbye very politely to the bi-coloured python rock snake, and he helped the snake to coil himself back up on the rock. Then he went on, a little warm, but not at all astonished, eating melons and throwing the rind about because he could not pick it up, till the road he trod on, something that he thought was a log of wood at the very edge of the great grey, green, greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees. But it was really the crocodile. And the crocodile winked one eye like this. "Excuse me," said the elephant's child most politely, "but do you happen to not have seen a crocodile in these parts?" Then the crocodile winked the other eye and lifted half his tail out of the mud. And the elephant's child stepped back most politely because he did not wish to be spanked again. "Come hither, little one," said the crocodile. "Why do you ask such things?" "Excuse me," said the elephant's child most politely, "but my father has spanked me, my mother has spanked me, not to mention my tall aunt the ostrich and my tall uncle the giraffe, who kicked ever so hard, as well as my broad aunt the hippopotamus and my hairy uncle the baboon, and including the bi-coloured python rock snake with the scalesome flailsome tail just up on the bank, who spanks harder than any of them. And so, if it's quite all the same to you, I don't want to be spanked any more. Come hither, little one, said the crocodile, for I am the crocodile. And he wept crocodile tears to show it was quite true. Then the elephant's child grew all breathless and panted, and kneeled down on the bank and said, "You are the very person I've been looking for all these long days. Will you please tell me what you have for dinner?" "Come hither," said the crocodile, "and I'll whisper." Then the elephant's child put his head down close to the crocodile's musky, tusky mouth. And the crocodile caught him by his little nose, which up to that very week, that very day, that very hour, that very minute had been no bigger than a boot, though not much more useful. "I think," said the crocodile, and he said it between his teeth like this, "I think today I will begin with elephant's child." At this, the elephant's child was much annoyed, and he said, speaking through his nose like this, "Let go! You're hurting me." Then the bi-coloured python rock snake scuffled down from the bank and said, "My young friend, if you do not know now, immediately, instantly, pull as hard as ever you can. It is my opinion that your acquaintance in the large pattern leather ulster," and by this he meant the crocodile, "will jerk you yonder into limpid stream before you can say Jack Robinson." This is the way the bi-coloured python rock snakes always talk. Then the elephant's child sat back on his little haunches, and he pulled, and he pulled, and he pulled, and his nose began to stretch. And the crocodile floundered into the water, making it all creamy with great sweeps of his tail. And he pulled, and he pulled, and he pulled. And the elephant child's nose kept on stretching. And the elephant's child spread all his little four legs, and he pulled, and he pulled, and he pulled, and his nose kept on stretching. And the crocodile threshed his tail like an oar, and he pulled, and he pulled, and he pulled, and at each pull, the elephant's child's nose grew longer and longer, and it hurt him. Oh! Then the elephant's child felt his legs slipping, and he said through his nose, which was now nearly 5 feet long, "This is too much for me." Then the bi-coloured rock python snake came down from the bank, and he knotted himself in a double clove hitch round the elephant child's hind legs and said, "Rash and inexperienced traveller, we will now seriously devote ourselves to a little tension, because if we do not, it is my impression that yonder self-propelling man of war with armour-plated upper deck," and by this he meant the crocodile, "will permanently stop your future career." That is the way all bi-coloured python rock snakes always talk. So he pulled, and the elephant's child pulled, and the crocodile pulled, But the elephant's child and the bi-coloured python rock snake pulled hardest, and at last the crocodile let go of the elephant child's nose with a plop that you could hear all up and down the Limpopo. Then the elephant's child sat down most hard and sudden. But first he was careful to say thank you to the bi-coloured python rock snake. And next he was kind to his poor pulled nose and wrapped it up in cool banana leaves, and he hung it in the great grey green greasy Limpopo to cool. "What are you doing that for?" said the bi-coloured python rock snake. "Excuse me," said the elephant's child, "but my nose is badly out of shape and I'm waiting for it to shrink." "Then you'll have to wait a long time," said the bi-coloured python rock snake. "Some people do not know what is good for them," he said. Well, the elephant's child sat there for 3 days waiting for his nose to shrink. But it never grew any shorter. And besides, it made him squint. You'll see and understand that the crocodile had pulled it out into a really, truly long trunk. Same as all elephants have today. Well, at the end of the 3rd day, a fly came along and stung him on the shoulder. And before he knew what he was doing, he lifted up his trunk and he hit that fly dead with the end of it. "Vantage number 1, said the bi-coloured python rock snake. "You couldn't have done that with a mere smear nose. Try and eat a little now." Before he thought what he was doing, the elephant's child put out his trunk and plucked a large bundle of grass, dusted it clean against his forelegs and stuffed it into his own mouth. "Vantage number 2, said the bi-coloured python rock snake. "You couldn't have done that with a mere smear nose." "Don't you think the sun is very hot here?" "It is," said the elephant's child, and before he thought what he was doing, he slooped up a sloop of mud from the banks of the great grey-green greasy Limpopo, and he slapped it on his head, splosh, where it made a cool, sloopy, sloshy mud cap, all trickly behind his ears. "Vantage number 3, said the bi-coloured python rock snake. "You couldn't have done that with a mere smear nose. Now, how do you feel about being spanked again?" "Excuse me," said the elephant's child, "but I should not like that at all." "How would you like to spank somebody?" said the bi-coloured python rock snake. "I would like that very much indeed," said the elephant's child. "Well," said the bi-coloured python rock snake, "you will find that new nose of yours very useful to spank people with." "Thank you," said the elephant's child. "I'll remember that. And now I think I'll go home to all my dear families and try." So the elephant's child went home across Africa, frisking and whisking his trunk. When he wanted fruit to eat, he pulled fruit down from a tree instead of waiting for it to fall as he'd used to do. When he wanted grass, he plucked grass up from the ground instead of going on his knees as he used to do. And when the flies bit, he broke off the branch of a tree and used it as a fly whisk, and he made himself a new cool slushy squishy mud cap whenever the sun was too hot. When he felt lonely walking through Africa, he sang to himself down his trunk, and the noise was louder than several brass bands. He went especially out of his way to find a broad hippopotamus. She was no relation to his, and he spanked her very hard to make sure what the bicoloured python rock snake had spoken about was true with his new trunk. And the rest of the time he picked up the melon rinds that he dropped on his way to the Limpopo, for he was a tidy elephant's child. One dark evening, he came back to all his dear families, and he coiled up his trunk and said, "How do you do?" They were very glad to see him and immediately say, "Come here and be spanked, your satiable curiosity." "Pooh," said the elephant's child. "I don't think you peoples know anything about spanking, but I do, and I'll show you." Then he uncurled his trunk and he knocked two of his dear brothers head over heels. "Oh, bananas!" said they. "Where did you learn that trick? And what have you done to your nose?" "I got a new one from the crocodile on the banks of the great grey green greasy Limpopo River," said the elephant's child. "I asked him what he had for dinner, and he gave me this to keep." "It looks very ugly," said his hairy uncle the baboon. "It does," said the elephant's child, "but it's very useful." And do you know what he did? He picked up his hairy uncle the baboon by one hairy leg with his trunk, and he threw him into a hornet's nest. Then that bad elephant's child spanked all his dear families for a long time, till they were very warm and greatly astonished. He pulled out his tall ostrich aunt's tail feathers, and he caught his tall uncle the giraffe by the hind leg and dragged him through a thorn bush, and he shouted at his broad aunt the hippopotamus, and he blew bubbles into her ear when she was sleeping in the water after meals. But he never ever let anyone touch the Kula Kula bird. At last things grew so exciting that his dear families went off one by one in a hurry to the banks of the great grey green greasy Limpopo River, all set with fever trees, to borrow new noses from the crocodile. When they came back, nobody spanked anybody anymore. And ever since that day, all the elephants you will ever see have trunks, especially like the trunk of the elephant's child. So now you know how the elephant got his long trunk. I hope you enjoyed that story, and I won't see you next week because I've got a little holiday next week, but I will be back a week on Tuesday for Tots Music and the following Thursday for story time. So I'll see you all again very soon. Bye-bye.